Entering into the third compendium of The Walking Dead, I was very curious how the infamous Negan arc would actually go down. It's nearly impossible to be aware of The Walking Dead as a series, either in comic form or in television, without having some kind of awareness of who Negan is. Perhaps one of the most popular characters and the story's definitive villain. Which is wild when you consider just how insane the governor was, but also the governor in the TV version wasn't nearly as crazy as the governor in the comics, so I guess it didn't have as big of a cultural impact. But also you have had Rick's crew encounter a bunch of other crazy characters like the cannibals and, of course, the zombies. And perhaps it may seem a little strange that with the appearance of Negan, the zombie threat does get pushed to the background a little bit, but as I was saying at the end of the last video that I made, I think the purpose of many zombie stories, not just The Walking Dead, is to emphasize the true horrors of humanity and the depths in which we can sink when law, authority, and order disappear and when we get pushed back more towards our primal selves. Pretty much every George Romero zombie movie is a commentary on the state of the world and humanity as a whole, and nearing chapter 100 of The Walking Dead, I do think it was a pretty good move to shift into another era and begin to focus on what happens a little ways into the zombie outbreak as opposed to just discovering it, as a way to see all these towns begin to set up establishments and the idea of where humanity can go now that we've begun to assemble once more. As well, the build-up to Negan works remarkably well. We begin hearing about him several chapters before his actual reveal, and the fact that Rick downplays this threat as something that they can easily handle also helps build up the tension when he eventually arrives. It feels so ominous, like, who the hell is this guy, and why have so many establishments been scared of him, and yet few have ever actually seen him. But before I get to his reveal, there are two very important story elements that happen beforehand. One is the unexpected death of Abraham. He's killed by a member of Negan's crew with an arrow through his head, and it's a pretty big bummer, especially since Abraham never even gets to meet Negan in the comic, and I think they would have had some really interesting interactions together. I get that Abraham is one of the best fighters, so it begins to put the protagonist at a disadvantage from the start with him not being there, but his end is very unceremonious and shifts away from it very quickly in the story. And unlike the upcoming death of Glenn, which feels huge, this one felt more like they just needed to get rid of him kind of quickly. The other thing is the official start of Rick and Andrea becoming a couple, and honestly, for me, it works pretty well. Characters hooking up in the story is pretty normal at this point. Also, they have always had some kind of chemistry, and they're both the most efficient members of the group, and honestly, I like this relationship a lot more than the Rick and Michonne one that they tried to do in the TV show. But yeah, let's talk about this. Negan's reveal and the infamous scene where it happens. A big, muscular guy in a leather jacket, wearing a smile on his face, an extremely foul mouth, and a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire that he calls Lucille. But unlike the governor that was just out of his mind and chaotic, Negan is way more in control, and he's also genuinely enjoying the things that he's doing. He has an upbeat and pleasant personality, even when he's talking about horrific things like beating somebody to death. He seems extremely desensitized by it and very happy about the fact that he has to do it. But a lot of what he does also seems like a performance in order to make everybody see him in a particular light, which I also enjoy. Not that he doesn't actually genuinely enjoy what he's doing, but he's ramping it up tenfold just to put on that presence in front of other people. To me, Negan has always kind of reminded me of a mafia boss.
I'm the motherfucking one who calls the shots.
Even his whole mission statement. He calls his group the Saviors, basically offering protection of others in exchange for them giving them half their goods and resources. And of course, it's an offer that they can't refuse. He runs a multi-town organization and keeps others in line with fear, whether it be fear of the outside world or fear of what he will do to them if they don't comply. He's also smart enough to realize that Rick being the leader of this group, that if he were to kill Rick, he would just turn him into a martyr. He can't kill Rick, so he has to break Rick down. He has to show everybody that looks up to Rick that Rick will bow at his feet, which incites fear and defeat into the hearts of others. It's a very smart play. Negan is looking at the long term, and he's not basically making decisions on his emotions, which is what the governor did. But with that, they also have Negan kill a legacy character, and this is to set up the threat as something that is incredibly serious, and also let the reader know that nobody is safe from this guy. And unfortunately, the character that was chosen was Glenn, savagely beaten to death with a bat, and it hurts. It hurt to watch in the show, and it hurts to read in the comic, even more so knowing that Maggie is pregnant at this point. Although for some reason, I do think it works better in the comic version, and I haven't quite put my finger on why at this point. But I understand if there was any point in the story where you were going to kill off a legacy character or somebody that's been there from the beginning, it has to be this moment. You have to set Negan up as a legitimate threat. After all the crazy stuff that have happened in the story and other characters dying in different ways, this is a moment that you really need to solidify as a moment that the audience has to pay attention to. It can't be throwaway. It can't be something that Rick and the others are going to defeat in 2 chapters. This has to be something very important. And so because of that, I understand why Glenn was chosen. I don't think it would have worked the same if they chose a character that was newer or only introduced 10 to 20 chapters ago. You have to take a character that's been there from the beginning. But it doesn't break Rick down as much as it makes him vow to kill Negan at some point, although he will have to comply at least for a while. He has to pretend to comply in order to plot his retaliation, which will definitely take some time. Also, at this point in the story, it does begin to do a lot more with Carl's character, which I like. I'm not exactly sure how old Carl is supposed to be at this point, but at one point, he takes it upon himself to stow away in a truck towards Negan's compound, and when he gets there, he just starts blasting all of them with an automatic rifle, and it's badass. There's also this uncomfortable bonding moment between Carl and Negan as they have this conversation together, and Negan even gives Carl an inside look at his compound and how he conducts business, leaving Carl alive and then returning him to Rick unharmed as a way to show their compliance is his ultimate goal. It's also this kind of sadistic psychological tact to use where somebody does something really horrible to you to instill fear, but then turns around and does something very nice for you. I know there's a name for that, I just don't know what it is, but Negan's manipulation tactics are pretty much unmatched throughout this segment of the story. So Rick's crew scrambles for other ways to even the odds. Eugene begins making them bullets, which is a great way to make his character be useful once more. Rick then begins meeting up with other towns, also under Negan's thumb, in an attempt for them to join forces against him, the many rising up against the powerful few. One of the town leaders is this guy named Ezekiel with a pet tiger. Pretty dope. He also views himself as a king and kind of puts on that performance to inspire his group, which I really like. And one of Negan's own crew members named Dwight also wishes to switch sides in order to help them out. The underlying idea is the potential of what can be accomplished with this uniting of humanity. It's what Rick wanted to do from the very start before the Negan scenario even happened. He wanted to rebuild the world, he wanted to train people, he wanted to give them jobs, he wanted to create a structure where everybody contributes in their own way. It turns out the best way to jumpstart that is to unite under a common enemy. So the plan is hatched, and during one of Negan's visits, they launch an assault on them. Andrea barely makes it out alive from her bell tower sniping location, and even the tiger gets in on the action. Under Rick's guidance, the combined power of multiple towns do bring the fight to Negan's doorstep, even leading a horde of zombies to them as well. And this just continues retaliation. It leads to segments in the comic that is called All-Out War, and yeah, it basically is. Negan attacks back by blowing the fuck out of Alexandria. The tiger eventually dies, which is one of the saddest deaths in the story besides Glenn. Characters lose their limbs. Rick is shot with an arrow. It all eventually leads to where they're forced to vacate until the final confrontation, because eventually Rick and Negan do come face to face once again, and Rick has this really long monologue that is basically the truth with a little bit of finessing. He asks why Negan is even fighting, what he is even trying to accomplish. Rick's intent before this whole mess was to have everybody work together, and he mentions that this can still happen. In a way, it can look like he's trying to talk no jutsu his way out of this, but everything he says has a point here, and there's always potential with that cooperation. And you can inspire and make people work harder instead of ruling them by fear if you feed into that potential. Everybody gets something out of it, and peace could eventually be achieved. And just as Negan begins to ponder Rick's words, Rick sneak attacks him and slices his fucking throat. Amazing. Love it. 10 out of 10. It's the exact opposite manipulation tactic that Negan uses. Both Negan and Rick do believe the things that they say, but they are also both putting on a performance for each other. They use the truth to lure each other right where they want them. It's a brilliant moment, but of course, Negan doesn't die here. Now, I have major issues with the TV series, and I dropped it shortly after the Negan arc there, especially pairing Negan up with Maggie. I'm just saying that if my wife didn't take the opportunity to kill the person who brutally murdered me with a baseball bat, I would haunt her from beyond the grave even more than I would haunt my murderer. I'm just saying. But I'm going to see where the comic takes it instead, because I know it goes in a different direction. There's also been issues in many different shows and stories where the villain character is so popular that they need to come up with reasons to not kill them and keep them in the story. And this often leads to an inevitable redemption arc. Sometimes that can work, and sometimes it's extremely forced and cringy. And again, I don't really know where this comic is going to take Negan, but I do hope they keep him as a villain, because for me, there's no redeeming this moment. I don't want to see him become a hero. I don't want to see him sacrifice himself to save somebody. I don't want any of that. I want a cathartic ending for him, but I don't know if I'm going to get that. But going in-universe, I do get the intent from Rick's character because he wants Negan to rot in a jail cell because, one, it will be a slow, painful end for Negan as he's trapped and forced to watch them thrive around him as he just wastes away, and two, it's Rick's sense of justice, bringing back order and humanity to the world, especially since, he used to be a cop. Well, I can see this justification. He's also gone off the deep end many times himself, and he doesn't want to do anything else that would be reminiscent of something that Negan would do. He wants to show himself to be better than Negan. He wants to show the townspeople they can be better than him. He wants to prove to everyone else that they can be civilized again, and I get it. I would also say that that's probably the conclusion of the Negan arc, but the compendium goes on a little bit further. There's a time skip that happens, and I'm not sure exactly how many years it is, but Rick has a buzz cut now with a beard and is still with Andrea. Carl is definitely a teenager at this point, and their towns are functional, farming, and everybody is working together just as he desired. It takes us right out of the anxiety and brutality of the war and puts us into peace for the first time in a long time. But that's just to juxtapose what is soon about to happen. We're updated on a lot of the characters at this point. Negan is still in his jail cell and casually having conversations with Carl from time to time. Carl wanting to move to the hilltop location to do some work there, and Carl has a lot more agency now with the time skip, and we get rid of a lot of those young kid tendencies. Of course, now we have teenage tendencies, but they tend to be a little bit more relatable and a little bit more interesting, and I like seeing Carl now as, unlike a lot of the adult characters in the story, most of Carl's life has been spent during this apocalypse, and he has little memory of his life before it. Now, to counteract the thriving society at play, something is happening outside of these towns. Some of the soldiers keeping the perimeters clear of zombies thought that they heard some of the zombies talking, specifically whispering. And this introduces us to a new group of antagonists called the Whisperers. But they're very different from what we've seen before. It seems like instead of trying to rebuild the world, they have submitted themselves to living alongside the zombies, living as primally as possible. They cover themselves in zombie skin, guts, and masks, and walk alongside them, hiding and waiting in the hordes for the right chance to strike. And instead of wanting to take over or rule, when they begin to cross paths with Rick's crew, they seem more curious than anything else, not unlike an animal in the wild watching you from afar, wondering what it is you're up to. A young member of theirs named Lydia gets captured and begins a dynamic with Carl, and this is really interesting as a direction to take Carl because, as I said, he grew up within this apocalypse, and so he's had to do horrible things to survive from a very young age. He's grown accustomed to it in a different way than a lot of the other characters. Lydia also grew up during the apocalypse as well, with the primal ideals of the Whisperers. Carl may in fact have more in common with her than he has with his own crew. Also, well, he's a teenage boy and she's attractive and wants to bang him. So, there's that too. When the leader of the Whisperers, Alpha, Lydia's mom, takes her back, Carl runs off after them. While at the same time, there's this really cool parallel of Maggie almost getting assassinated, so she kills Gregory, the man that poisoned her, hanging him in front of everybody. Just at the same time, Rick, even knowing that Negan's cell was left open and unlocked, chooses to just lock Negan back up and keep him alive. Maggie quickly eliminated the threat in her town, where Rick is keeping the threat in his alive and well. And for all intents and purposes, Negan is the much larger threat. But when Rick finds out that Carl is missing, he sets out after him, meeting with the Whisperers and Alpha. Their philosophies conflict as Alpha stresses that to deal with the harsh, cruel realities of life, they must embrace their animalistic nature, and that this peaceful society is futile and will soon collapse. That the outside world is only for the strong. And viewing Rick, Carl, and now even her own daughter as weak, she tells them to leave. Oh, how nice of her. She just lets them all go. That's great. And, oh, no, actually, Alpha infiltrated the town earlier, learned about everybody, and murdered more than a dozen of people, including Ezekiel, placing all their severed heads on pikes as a warning to them all. Yeah. Compendium 3 ends with Rick finding this out, falling to his knees, and contemplating what to do next. And I have to be honest, as much as the Negan stuff was great, these ideas intrigue me even more. Maybe it's that I'm getting into truly uncharted territory here, so I'm excited to see it. I dropped the TV show by this point, and this is my first time reading the comics, so I have no idea where the story is actually going to go from here, and I like that feeling. I like how different the Whisperers seem compared to all the other antagonists so far, and I like aging up Carl and giving him this relationship dynamic with Lydia. I like that we are beginning to see the seeds of opposing viewpoints into how they run their towns between Rick and Maggie. So overall, I'm just really pumped to get to the fourth and final compendium. So yeah, guys, that's my thoughts and brief review of Compendium 3. Let me know what you think of this portion of the story and the Negan arc down in the comments below. Also, please like the video and subscribe if you want to stick around and see some more content. And if there's anything in the fourth compendium coming up that you can tease, don't give me any spoilers or anything, but if you want to say like, hey, look out for this character, or can't wait till you get to this moment, go ahead and put that in the comments too. Anyways, guys, thanks for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. If you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have a Patreon, channel memberships, and merch store all linked down below in the description. Other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.